So today's topic is going to be Kiddush Levana, the blessing that we make on the new moon at the beginning of each month. And certainly we're following, we started with Friday night Shabbos candles. We went to Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night Havdalah, and talked about Besamim. And then commonly, although we'll touch on it, Kiddush Levana is recited on a Motzei Shabbos, on a Saturday night after Shabbos. Now, since it's usually Saturday night after Ma'ariv, so the Gabbai in Shul will announce Kiddush Levana, and there's a fellow who sits in front of me in Shul who every month inevitably he calls out, "I'm sponsoring the Kiddush," which actually raises the question: why do we call Kiddush Levana a Kiddush? I understand during the day on Shabbos, Friday night, we make Kiddush, we sanctify the Shabbos. Certainly on Friday night, the blessing is Mikadesh HaShabbos. Hashem sanctifies the Shabbos, and so we're kind of declaring that sanctity. So we call it Kiddush. But Kiddush Levana, where we make a blessing over the moon, are we sanctifying the moon? Does the moon have holiness that we are sanctifying it? Seemingly not. I don't think that fits well in with our religion to give the moon sanctity. In fact, the Mishnah Brura, the Chavetz Chaim, in his commentary Bir Halacha, he brings down that he once heard that the reason why at the end of Kiddush Levana we say Aleinu, so traditionally at the end of davening, at the end of each tefillah we say Aleinu. And there's a couple other places where we say Aleinu. One is after a bris, after a circumcision, and another is Kiddush Levana. At the end of Kiddush Levana we say Aleinu. And the Bir Halacha brings down that he once heard a nice idea why the custom is after Kiddush Levana to say Aleinu. And that is because we don't want anybody, God forbid, to mistakenly think that we're going out to the moon and we are serving it or worshiping it, giving it any honor, howling at the moon. No, we're not doing any of that. It's not a ritual towards the moon. And therefore we say Aleinu, because in Aleinu we declare that Hashem is God, Bashamayim Imal, in the heavens above, Yal Aretz Mitachas, and on the earth, Ein Od, there's nothing besides for him, and within Aleinu is a declaration of our understanding and our belief in Hashem being master of all, and we make it clear, no, we're not here to worship the moon. That's and what are we doing? That's what we're going to try to explain. But we're not here to sanctify the moon, to apply holiness to it, to worship it, God forbid, nothing like that. Now, do we bow at Aleinu? So seemingly we do bow in Aleinu because we're bowing to Hashem just like we would in a normal Aleinu. So I think that's fine. Now, by the way, others, the Aderes, writes that that's not the reason why we say Aleinu after Kiddush Levana. The reason we say Aleinu after Kiddush Levana is because it was common in some places that they were not able to go outside for Kiddush Levana, either because it was too dirty to say outside, or it was dangerous, or different reasons why they couldn't go out. And we'll discuss soon that if you can't go outside, you're actually allowed to say it inside as long as you can see the moon from inside. And so they would say it in Shul, and they would say it during Ma'ariv, and Ma'ariv ends with Aleinu. So the end of every tefillah, we say Aleinu. So the reason, so originally they were saying Kiddush Levana in the evening service, in the Ma'ariv service, and it was followed by Aleinu. So then, no, I shouldn't say originally, but there was a period where that was common. So therefore, that carried over when they went back outside and started saying it outside again. They just continued to say Aleinu after Kiddush Levana, And according to that, it's a very just sort of almost like a practical mistake that we say it, or just carrying on a tradition, but it's not like the Mishnah Berurah, not like the Bir Halacha said, that we're showing that we're not worshiping the moon, although that's obviously certainly true, but but that's not the goal of saying Aleinu at that juncture. Fine. Now, what is Kiddush Levana? Before we get to the why, and or the deeper understanding of what we're doing, but what are we doing? What does one do for Kiddush Levana? So Kiddush Levana is a bracha said when seeing the moon. It can be said once 3 days have passed from what we call the molad, which is the first visible point, or actually maybe the first visible point of the moon, where it starts to wax again, to grow again every month, right? The moon waxes and wanes, it grows, at least from what we can see, when as the moon rotates the earth, and the some of it becomes the sun's reflection of the moon off the moon becomes more and more visible, and then it becomes less and less visible once you hit the halfway point of the month. So until it completely disappears, which is when the earth is in between the sun and the moon, blocking any light to the moon. So we say Kiddush Levana while the moon is growing in our eyes, but we can start saying it from 3 days after it begins to wax, it begins to grow, at least for Ashkenazim. Sephardim, many wait till 7 days after. And we can say it until it starts to shrink again, which is halfway through the month, which is, a lunar month is about 29 and a half days. So about half of that. So 14 and 3/4 days into the month. Again, from the molad, from that first speck of the moon waxing, that's when we can say this blessing. What is the blessing that we say? So the Gemara tells us the whole blessing, but I put it on the source sheet. It's in our Siddur too, because that's what we say it from. And the blessing is as follows: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the world. Asher b'ma'amaro barash chakim. By His word created the heavens. V'ruach piv kol tzvam, and the breath of His mouth all their hosts. Chok uzman nasang lahem shel yishanos tafkidam. He set for them a law and time; they should not deviate from their task. Sasem usmechem lasos ritzon koneim, or konam. They are joyous and glad to perform the will of their owner, or their creator. Po'al emes shepulaso emes. Here they translate, they are workers of truth, whose work is truth. That's actually based on a different version. Po'ale. Po'al emes would refer to God. He's a true worker whose work is truth. V'la Levana amar shetischadesh. And to the moon he said that it should renew itself at each month. Ataris tiferes lamuse vateng. A crown of beauty for those He carried from the womb. For us, Shemasidim Mischadish Kamosa, that they are destined to be renewed like it. We are destined to be renewed like the moon. Ulefaer liyotzim Hashem kvod malchuso, and to praise their Creator for the name of His glorious kingdom. Baruch atah Hashem mechadesh chadashim. Blessed are you, the Lord, who renews the months. That is the blessing. Within this blessing, we talk about how the moon does not deviate from its task. It's always on schedule, does exactly what it's supposed to do to serve its creator. And also we talk about the renewal of the moon, and just like the moon renews itself, so too we, the Amuse Vaten, those who are carried from the womb, are also in the future going to be renewed. And that is the blessing, and hopefully we're not going to discuss every word, but we'll get a better sense of what we're trying to declare with this blessing. But let's just come back for a moment to the question I raised just a few moments ago, which is, why do we call the blessing Kiddush Levana, the sanctification of the moon, rather than Birchas HaLevana, the blessing over the moon? Usually, for example, we make a blessing over the sun every, I think it's 27 years, 29 years, when the sun reaches its original point of where it was created. Very rare that we say that blessing, but that's called Birchas Hachama, the blessing over the sun. Usually, blessings that we say when we 28 years, okay. Um, in between 27 and 29. That's what I meant, 28. So so usually when we have a birchas haroeh, we make a blessing over seeing something. It's just called a blessing. So we have a blessing over a rainbow, or a blessing over other wonders, or if we see lightning, there's a blessing. It's birchas hariyah. It's a blessing over seeing. Yet this we call kiddush. We call it sanctification. Why do we not just call it birchas halavana, a blessing over the moon? So Rav Asher Weiss, great contemporary posik, quotes from an earlier work called the Responsum, the Chuvos of the Maharshag, of Shimon Greenfield, and he says that actually this question, his son asked him this question, and and he asked, why is it called Kiddush? What does Kiddush have to do with it? And he said that actually his son suggested maybe it's a mistake. Really, it should be called the blessing of the Chidush Halavana, of the renewal of the moon. Chidush, which means renewal. And Chidush is very similar to Kiddush. It's not so hard to get a ches turned into a kuf. All you have to do is have the leg fall a bit, and you've turned a ches into a kuf, basically. So a little bit, maybe the one leg also has to come up a bit, but maybe not actually. Yeah, I think just the leg would fall, and that would be a kuf. So it was a mix-up. It was really supposed to be people called it Chidush Halavana, the renewal of the moon, and mistakenly it became called Kiddush Levana. That's what his son suggested, to which he responded that it's true that we don't find in early sources, like in the Gemara or in the Midrash, that it's ever called Kiddush Levana, but we do find in later sources that are very reliable, even like the Shulchan Aruch, and in that time period that they called it Kiddush Levana, and it's hard to imagine that they were all making a mistake to call it Kiddush Levana. They must have understood that that's an appropriate name. So he's not so pleased with the answer that it's called Kiddush Levana because of a mistake. And so he suggests something, the Maharshag of Shimon Greenfield suggests something, and Rav Asher Weiss basically says the same idea. And that is that we actually can find, if we go back to the Midrash and the Jerusalem Talmud, the Talmud Yerushalmi, different versions of what the closing of this blessing was. So the way that we say, the one that's on the source sheet, is Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, mechadesh chadashim, who renews the months. But the Medrash, it's on your source sheet, it's source number 2, Shmos Rabbah, this is Parshas Bo, on the verse HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, on the verse about Rosh Chodesh, which relates to Kiddush Levana, but it's not the exact same thing. Let's just note the difference. So there's a mitzvah to sanctify the new month, called the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, Kiddush HaChodesh. That was done by witnesses who saw the new moon would come to the Beis Din, the central court, and say, we saw that there's a new moon, it's a new month, and the Beis Din, the court, would declare a new month, and they would sanctify the new moon. They would be mekadesh, they would sanctify it. They would say mekudash, just like we say when we do kiddushin at a wedding, when the husband sanctifies the wife with kiddushin. So they say, the witnesses say mekudash. That's what they would say when they sanctify the new month. Mekudash, it's sanctified, it's a new month. That's done at the end or the beginning of a new month. It's done on the 30th day of the last month, which becomes the first day of the new month. But it's not done 3 days into the new month until 15 days in. It's always done by Rosh Chodesh. So we're not talking about the same thing. There's Kiddush HaChodesh, they're sanctifying the month, which declares Rosh Chodesh, and there's Kiddush Levana. There's blessing the moon. Two different things, but maybe they are related. And the Medrash says, HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, this should be, that's the commandment to declare a Rosh Chodesh. The Medrash says, HaRoes HaLevana Heich Tzarech Levarech. If you see the moon, what are you supposed to bless? Seemingly talking about Kiddush Levana, Birchas Levana, the blessing over the moon. When you see the moon, one who sees the moon, what do they bless? Not everybody was sanctifying the new month, only the high court was. So this seems to be talking to every individual. One who sees the new moon, what should they bless? So the Medrash says, Bizman Shah Yisrael Mekadshing Es HaChodesh, at the time that the Jewish people would still sanctify the new month, Yesh mi Rabbanan Amring Baruch Mechadesh Chadashim. So some said the blessing of Mechadesh Chadashim, who renews the months. And that's what we have. That's what we say. Mechadesh Chadashim. That's the closing of our bracha. The Yesh Mehem Amrin, some would say Baruch Mekadesh Chadashim, who sanctifies the month. And Yesh Mehem Amrin Mekadesh Yisrael. And some of them say who sanctifies Israel. That was the blessing. Why? Because in Ein Yisrael Mekadshim Oso, Ein Oso Kiddush Klum. Because if the Jewish people don't sanctify the new month, then there is no sanctification of the new month. We need to sanctify it. We're the ones who declare Rosh Chodesh. So we are sanctified in that we can sanctify the new month. We touched on this last week. So three possible blessings when you see the moon. One is Mechadesh Chadashim, who renews the month. One is Mikadesh Chadashim, who sanctifies the month, and one is Mikadesh Yisrael, who sanctifies the Jewish people. Now that is not relevant nowadays because we no longer sanctify the months. They are already sanctified for us. 1,500 years ago, they were sanctified for us going forward so that we don't have to sanctify each new month. So that's not relevant now. And that's why the Medrash says, that's what the commentaries say, when we used to sanctify the month, then all three of these were options, including that Mikadesh Yisrael, that we are sanctified, that we can sanctify the month. That's no longer a logical option, they say. But there's still two other choices, Mikadesh Chadashim, who renews the months, and Mikadesh Chadashim, who sanctifies the months. Well, why would we say Mikadesh Chadashim, who sanctifies the months, when we see the moon? We're not sanctifying the month. We're just making a blessing over the moon. What does that have to do with sanctifying the new month? That was the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. This is something else. This is Kiddush Levana. This is Birchas Levana. This is a blessing over the moon. Why would we say Mikadesh Chadashim, who sanctifies the months? So it would seem, says Rav Asher Weiss and others, that there is a connection between Kiddush Levana and Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the moon and sanctifying the new month. That even though we don't sanctify the month anymore, but we do sanctify the moon as somewhat of a hint, of an illusion, of a zecher, a way to remember the sanctification of the month. And that's why we call it Kiddush Levana. We use the word Kiddush Levana to sanctify the moon, to say that this blessing over the moon should also be somewhat of a remembrance of the whole idea of sanctifying each new month. It's not done on the same day. Because we're not sanctifying the month. It's not done at the beginning of the month. It's done a few days in. It has to be done when the moon is starting to give some more significant light. That's why we have to wait till 3 days in. You have to be actually able to see the moon in some significant degree. But there's a bit of a remembrance of the idea of sanctifying the months, of declaring Rosh Chodesh, of sanctifying Rosh Chodesh, and that's why we call it Kiddush Levana. That's what Rav Asher Weiss suggests, and as I mentioned, the Maharshag of Shimon Greenfield also says something along those lines. Okay, so that's why we call it Kiddush Levana, even though it's not really Kiddush, we're not really sanctifying the moon, we're really just making a blessing when we see the moon. Fine. Now, what are we doing? What are we doing? What is this blessing about? So let's look at another Gemara, or a Gemara. It's our first one that we're looking at. The last verse on the page, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, "Ve'amar Rabbi Acha bar Chanina, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan." Rabbi Acha bar Chanina, second name of Rabbi Asi, name of Rabbi Yochanan. Anyone who blesses the new moon or the month in its time, it's as if they have received the face of the Shechina, of the divine presence. That saying Kiddush Levana is in a certain sense welcoming the divine presence, being makabel, receiving it, welcoming it. How do we know that? Because it says here with regards to really declaring Rosh Chodesh, HaChodesh Hazeh, this new moon, and it says, and elsewhere it says, this is my God and I will glorify him. That's in the Song of Az Yashir, by the splitting of the sea. They say, this is my God and I will glorify him. So we have the word Zeh, and the word Zeh, this and this. And so the Gemara learns out that they said, Zeh Keli Vanveyu, this is my God and I will glorify him. That was, they were witnessing the Shechina, Hashem's presence, to a high degree. So when it says HaChodesh Hazeh, this moon, Hazeh, is that like, you're like seeing the Shechina when you see the moon, which is a very interesting idea. But that's what it's telling us. When you see the moon, it's like you're seeing the Shechina. We have to try to understand why that would be. Okay. And then it says, Tanad ve Rabbi Shmuel,
excuse me, Rabbi?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're specifically talking about Kiddush Levana, but this whole idea about seeing the Shechina, isn't that like was one of the issues when people started worshiping the celestial beings, because they were seeing God through these celestial beings, but in reality, that's part of nature. And aren't we supposed to be able to look at nature and see Hashem's hand in nature? Isn't that why the moon is the one that's designated, that we see the Shekhinah through the moon, when in reality you should be seeing the Shekhinah through everything in nature?
Okay, excellent question. I think two different points. The first point is the way that people came to worship these types of things. I think that what you're alluding to is what the Rambam talks about, where they began to see sort of the agents and the messengers of God as divine in themselves, and they said, God has removed himself from this world. They may have believed in a creator, but they believed that he removed himself and he put emissaries in place, and we could just worship the emissaries and we don't have to worship the one who's in control of everything. That's one point. A separate point is why are we saying that specifically in the moon we see the Shekhinah? We should be able to see God's presence in everything. So let's try to understand it. We'll hopefully answer that question as we go. Okay, let's just finish off this Gemara. The Gemara says, Tanad ve Rabbi Shmuel. They talk in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall of Rabbi Shmuel. If the Jewish people merited to greet the face of their father in heaven only one time each and every month, it would suffice for them. Meaning, I don't love this translation. I think the proper translation would be, if all we had was to be able to greet God, if that's all we could do, that would suffice for us. Which is a way of saying this is like a big deal, to be able to greet the Shekhinah, to greet God's presence in this way. Therefore, we should stay it standing, because we're greeting the Shekhinah, we're greeting God's presence when we say Kiddush Levana, so we should say it standing. So there's this aspect, seems pretty central to Kiddush Levana, that we are greeting the Shekhinah. And for the most part now, what we'll concentrate on is why is that? What does that mean? Now, before we do that, this has a lot of implications in what we do and how we do it. So Abaye said, therefore, since you're greeting the Shekhinah, you should stand, right? It should be said standing, because you're greeting God's presence. Additionally, we go outside when we say Kiddush Levana. That's the Ramah or Moshe Isserlis in Shulchan Aruch says that we don't do it inside. We don't even do it under a roof. We should go out. Why do we go out? So the Mishnah Berurah explains, because we're greeting the Shekhinah, and it's not proper respect and honor to stand under a roof. You should be going out. You shouldn't be inside, and you shouldn't be under a roof. You should be going out to greet the Shekhinah, like out to the street, out to the sidewalk, to greet God's presence. Now, that being the case, though, if you can't for some reason, like we said before, if you can't go outside, you're not feeling well, or it's not clean outside, and it's not a place where you could say recite a blessing, or it could be dangerous amongst non-Jews. It won't work. So you could do it inside as long as you can see the moon. But the reason why we go outside is because we're greeting the Shekhinah. Additionally, the Kaf HaChaim brings down that you should say it carefully and slowly. Enunciate, say it carefully, because you're greeting the Shekhinah. You're greeting God's presence. How can you just throw the words out and mumble them away without saying them properly if you're greeting the Shekhinah? So that's also a reason why we dance. We're so joyful at Kiddush Levana, because how amazing, we're greeting the Shekhinah, we're greeting God's presence. So in what way are we greeting the Shekhinah? So I hope to offer 3 different ideas of why Kiddush Levana, why is it that we're greeting the Shekhinah? So the first is found in the early commentaries, the Rishonim. They say in a little bit different ways. Rabbeinu Yonah, in his commentary on Brachos, he says that even though we can't see God with our eyes, but we see him through his wonders. He quotes a pasuk, he quotes a verse. It's saying Yeshaya, it says, Achein ata kel mistatar, Elokei Yisrael Moshiach. You are a God who hides, the God of Israel who saves. Which means, he says, that even though you're hidden, but when you save, when you bring salvation, then we see you. And he says similarly, that's through God's actions, through salvation, but also similarly through nature, we can see God. Through the wonders of creation, we can see Hashem in this world. And so when we look at the moon and we see this wondrous creation, then it's a way that we can see God. The Aruch HaShulchan adds, like, this, why that and not the stars then? He says, well, this is the closest celestial object. It's the closest to us, and so this is the one that's chosen. But the Rabbeinu Yonasan Milunil, the Ri Milunil, in his commentary on Sanhedrin, maybe gives us another layer to why it's the moon specifically. Of all the grand creations, wondrous creations, that's the one that we make a blessing, and that's the one that it's like we're greeting the Shekhinah. And that's because there's nothing like the moon where we see sort of the creation process repeated. In a certain way, every month the moon is recreated yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, ex nihilo. Of course, we know it's there the whole time. It doesn't have any light shining on it, and then it does, and then we can see it again. But the moon disappears, and then it's recreated, so to speak, each month. And it's a way that we can witness creation every month. And for that reason, it's specifically the moon that we choose to make a blessing over, and that we choose as declaring that's the one that we say we see the Shekhinah, we see God's presence in the world through that creation. Because not only is it this wondrous creation of Hashem that on its own reminds us that this is Hashem's world, and to be able to help us see Hashem in the world, but it's in a certain way a recurring recreation of the world, or something that gets recreated each month. We get to witness the Bria, the creation, and so seeing that wondrous creation and seeing it be recreated each month, that's a way that we see Hashem, and that's why it's like we're greeting the Shekhinah. So that's one idea. The Maharsha has a very different idea. Why is the moon, greeting the moon, blessing the moon, seeing the moon like greeting the Shekhinah? The Maharsha says that here in exile, we don't have the opportunity to see and experience God's presence in the same way, in any in any sense, in the same way as we did when we were on our land with our Beis Hamikdash, with our temple, and we're far from really being able to receive the Shekhinah, to receive God's presence in that way. However, the renewal of the moon each month, which is a sign, a symbol of our renewal, like we say in the blessing, that just as the moon renews itself each month, so too Hashem should renew us. So, and it's a symbol that we will be renewed. We, in many ways, are represented by the moon, or we represent the moon. Sorry, no, the moon represents the Jewish people. So, so therefore, it's a reminder in a certain way, like we can get ready to receive the Shekhinah again. Soon, just like the moon renews itself each month, so too we are going to be renewed, and we're going to be returned to our land, and we're going to be returned to that lofty level of having a Beis Hamikdash where the Shekhinah dwells to that great degree, where the Shekhinah, where Hashem's presence will dwell to the degree that it does when we have a Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, we go out and we see the moon, and when we see the moon, we're ready to welcome the Shekhinah in. We're ready to welcome, we're reminded that we're going to have our Beis Hamikdash rebuilt, and we're ready to welcome the Shekhinah into our rebuilt Beis Hamikdash. That's the message of the renewal of the moon. That's why we're greeting the Shekhinah. We're really getting ready to welcome it back in to a rebuilt Beis Hamikdash when the Jewish people are renewed. Now, based on this, we can understand another practice relating to Kiddush Levana, which is that we say Kiddush Levana on Motzei Shabbos usually. We try to say it on Saturday night. Now, again, you don't have to say it on Saturday night. You could say it. You do have to say it between the third, again for Ashkenazim, the third day after the Molad, after the beginning of the moon for that month, and halfway through the month. It doesn't have to be a Motzei Shabbos, but we aim to try to do it Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night. Why? So the Shulchan Aruch says that you should do it Motzei Shabbos, after Shabbos, kishu mevusam u'begadav naim, when you are pleasant smelling and you have nice clothes on. So it fits. We're greeting the Shekhinah. So we should do it when we have our Shabbos best on. We're wearing our best clothes, and we've bathed within 24 hours. Right? Back in the day, it wasn't so common to bathe regularly, but for Shabbos, everybody would bathe. So we're kind of at our cleanest at that point. So that's the best time, when we're the most presentable, to go and greet the Shekhinah. That's why we say it on Motzei Shabbos. That's what is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. But the Kaf HaChaim quotes from Reb Chaim Vital, the Kabbalist, the student of the Arizal, another reason, not so Kabbalistic, but another reason why we make the blessing on the moon on Motzei Shabbos, after Shabbos, is because that's the time that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, was Motzei Shabbos. And that's when the Shekhinah went into exile. That's when the divine presence went into exile. And therefore, it's on that night, ideally, that we say that we're going to be renewed, and the Shekhinah is going to come back, and we're going to welcome the Shekhinah back in. And so we go out to greet the Shekhinah, specifically on Motzei Shabbos, when the Shekhinah went into exile, to welcome it back and say, we just like the moon renews itself, so too will the Jewish people renew ourselves, or will be renewed by Hashem, and we'll have the Beis Hamikdash back, we'll have the temple back and we'll re-welcome the divine presence. Now, another time that this has implication is after Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. So the custom is not to say Kiddush Levana during the month of Av until after Tisha B'Av, because the beginning of Av, we're sad, we're mourning over the Beis Hamikdash. It's not time for, a happy event like Kiddush Levana. But what about right after Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av, whatever day of the week it is, it's a Sunday or whatever day it is. Should we say we've waited 9 days, right, and not say Kiddush Levana yet? Should we say Kiddush Levana after Tisha B'Av? So the Shulchan Aruch, the Rama, I think it is. The Rama says we don't do it after Tisha B'Av. We don't do it Motzei Tisha B'Av. Why not? Because it's still a sad time after Tisha B'Av. We still keep certain things in mourning, Motzei Tisha B'Av. We don't the Beis Hamikdash was still burning the night after Tisha B'Av. So you should wait past Motzei Tisha B'Av. That's what the Rama says. However, the Kaf HaChaim quotes from many later commentaries who disagree, and they say, no, we shouldn't delay at this point. It's Tisha B'Av's past. Let's go. We shouldn't delay this important mitzvah. And many had that custom, he says. And he quotes again that they asked Reb Chaim Vital, why do we say Kiddush Levana on Motzei Tisha B'Av? Specifically. So apparently in some places they specifically did. Again, it's already 9 days into the month. You want to say it. But they would specifically say Kiddush Levana on Motzei Tisha B'Av. And Reb Chaim Vital said that we say it specifically after Tisha B'Av to say that even though the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed and we've been sent into Golus, into exile, but we are going to be renewed like the moon, and therefore, after Tisha B'Av, when we're rising back up, we got off the floor, halfway through Tisha B'Av, we're on the rise now, and we're looking forward to the redemption. So after Tisha B'Av is a good time to say Kiddush Levana, because that's when we remind ourselves that we too are going to be redeemed. He also mentions that there's a tradition that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av, so that's a good day that after Tisha B'Av is a good time to be looking forward to that redemption, which is very much intertwined with Kiddush Levana, in that we talk about our renewal, and according to the Maharsha, that's the idea of greeting the Shekhinah after greeting the Shekhinah when we say Kiddush Levana is this idea of when we're renewed and we rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, that's when we're going to bring in the Shekhinah, and that way we're welcoming the Shekhinah when we say Kiddush Levana. So that's number 2. So number 1 was we greet the Shekhinah because through the wonders of creation, and specifically the moon, which renews itself each month, we see Hashem in the world, and that's how by looking at the moon, we are greeting the Shekhinah. Number 2 is that Kiddush Levana reminds us of our power of renewal, and that one day we will be renewed and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash and welcome the Shekhinah. So when we go out and say it, we're saying, come, we're welcoming the Shekhinah into our presence. The third idea, what it would mean to welcome the Shekhinah, is as follows. The Aruch HaShulchan notes that the Jewish people are compared to the moon in different places, and just like the moon doesn't have its own light, so right, it gets its light from the sun. So too, we don't have our own light. We have the light of Hashem. That's what gives us light, which shines upon us through Torah. Those are the words of the Aruch HaShulchan. Now, Rav Shimshon Pincus, in discussing, he's really discussing the idea of Rosh Chodesh and the importance of that being the first mitzvah. But in that context, he gives us a greater sense of of uh, of what it might mean to greet the Shekhinah, and he's not really explaining those words, but I think what he says will offer us another understanding. So so if we think deeply, a little deeper into how the moon receives its light from the sun, um, so so the moon at the beginning of the month, when you can't see it, it means the Earth the is right between the sun. Sorry, it's well, not, it's no, the moon. Sorry, I said it wrong before. When the moon is between the Earth and the one second, let me think about this. Yeah, when the moon is between the Earth and the sun, you don't see the light of the moon because it's it's not reflecting off of it. So it's when the moon is on the opposite side that it's full. So so um one second, I have to get this clear. Am I saying that right? Someone help me out. When the moon, you see the moon's light, or you,
It has to be on the side of the earth so that the sunlight can hit it. If it's in back of the earth, in back of the earth, then you won't see all of it. And if it's in front of the earth, you just see the sun. It'll be a likachama.
okay. So so the way that he says it is that just like when the moon moves, again, the moon is receiving its light from the sun. So just like when the moon moves towards the sun, it gets light, and but when it starts to move away from the sun, then it starts to wane. So too, the Jewish people, when we moved the sun, again, we're not saying the sun represents Hashem, but in this mashal, it could represent Hashem. When we move towards the light of Hashem, when we turn in the direction, not just turn our attention, turn our desire towards Hashem, so then we begin to receive that light from Hashem. We begin to grow. We begin to become lighter, and just like the moon grows as it turns towards the sun, its face towards the sun, and the more it's ready to receive from the sun, the lighter it gets, and then when it's no longer receiving light, it begins to shrink. So to us, when we turn ourselves towards Hashem and we say we want to receive your light, so then we grow. But when we turn away, so then we begin to shrink. And what Rav Pinkus is focused on really is that the key is really all about what's our desire. What do we want? And if what we want, if what we desire, we just have to turn towards Hashem. We just have to turn and say, I want to be, I want to be close to you. I want to be connected to you. That's the first step. That's the birth. That's the molad. When we want to be connected, and then we're ready to receive that light. And I think that mashal of the moon, that analogy of the moon and us, fits that to this idea of receiving the Shekhinah. That when we look at the moon, we understand that where does it get its light from? The moon is growing. Beginning of the month, that's when we have to say the bracha. It's growing. Where does it get its light from? It gets its light from the sun. So to us, we can take a lesson from that our light, our holiness can only come if we also turn ourselves towards Hashem. And in that sense, we're mekabel pnei Shekhinah, we're receiving the divine presence, in that the moon can be a an analogy, but a role model almost for us of how to receive the light of Hashem. All we need to do is turn towards Him, desire a closeness, and then we can receive His light. So that's a third understanding of Mekabel Pnei Shechina, why looking at the moon is like receiving the divine presence. It's that it acts as a mashal, as an analogy for us, that when we turn, that just as the moon turns towards the sun to receive its light, it becomes more and more enlightened, lit up. So too, all we need to do is turn towards the Shechina, turn towards Hashem, to begin our path of growth as well. So three ideas of what this bracha is about, what we're to take away from it, and why it is that when we say it, we are receiving the Shechina, and they're not exclusive to each other. They could all be true at the same time. Number one, when we look at the moon, we see Hashem in a certain sense because we see His wondrous creation. We see this wondrous creation that renews itself each month, just like the creation itself. That's our way of seeing Hashem in the world. Number two, the moon reminds us of our ability to renew ourselves, and that we will, or to be renewed by Hashem, that we will be renewed. We will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, rebuild the temple, welcome the Shechina again. And so when we turn towards the moon, we are welcoming the Shechina. We're saying we're ready to welcome the Shechina, welcome it back into our presence. And number three, that the moon acts as an analogy, a role model for us of how to receive Hashem's light, how to be Makabel the Shechina, how to receive Hashem's presence, which is through turning towards Him, desiring a closeness. That's what it takes. That's really, I just say all it takes, but that's the first step. And when we turn ourselves towards Him, then we begin a path of growth, just like the moon. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.